Productive Pastor 58, Pathways Part 2 with Fernie Rivera. What's going on, folks? Welcome back. Productive Pastor Chad's here, episode 58. Gonna finish up this two-parter with my buddy Fernie about pathways. And in the words of Psalm 41, it's all killer, no filler. We're going to go straight into the stuff right now, but I want to just point one thing at you. Make sure to cruise over to the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/pp/058. Grab Fernie's ebook about creating pathways. It's 100% free. He's starting to do this with more and more folks. You're going to want this information. It's helpful. So as we jump into this conversation today, what Fernie does is we build a pathway on air, on the podcast. And what I love about it is I just kind of threw the ball at him, and he gives a great example of how you can use pathways to create, essential parts of your preferred future. He takes something that I never would have expected because, me, I'm all practical. It's just all action focused, get into business. And Buddy Fernie's not like that. So just sit back and listen to how he would go about developing a pathway about a very specific part of what the local church might be. Cruise the show notes, grab the ebook. Let's just get straight into the conversation with Fernie today. Well, I'm back with my boy, Fernie. Fernie, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you.
So we're going to build a pathway real live here on the show. And we've not talked about this whatsoever at all.
Nope.
We have no idea what pathway we need to build. So how about this? I will throw you, we're going to, last episode we talked about how you like to start with pathways with the intended outcome. Mm-hmm. And then you like to look at where our people are now. And then you start connecting the dots in between.
Yep.
I'm going to break your rule a little bit because we got to have a current context. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a context.
Okay.
And then I'm going to let you decide from all of your experience with this, what you think like the first pathway needs to be, assuming there are none.
Okay.
Okay. So let's just, we know the median sized church in the United States is 65 people. So, I'm thinking Louisiana, Mississippi, the deep South where we live in, we know that sort of thing. Let's say you're in a church of, about 70 people in worship. Let's say 115 active adults in a community of 20,000. I think that's probably an average church for much of America. Mm-hmm. And they have no pathways.
That's good. So there's a couple of thoughts, ending places that I would start with.
I wish y'all could see his face right now.
Well, because my head's spinning in a million ways, right? So the first thought was, do we create a pathway to get more people involved, right? So I'm trying to do the math in my head. 115 active people out of 20,000. I can't do math that fast. But what percentage is that?
For the missional saturation number?
Yeah.
Oh, man, see, I love what Fernie, he knows the way I think. We got 115, right?
115 out of 20,000 residents.
So that's a missional saturation number of 0.558%.
Okay. So not even the 1%. So
not even 1%.
One of my first thoughts would be, how do we create a pathway to increase that to 1%? That's just a starting point. One of my other thoughts was when you said 70 in worship and 150 active adults. Another thought I had was we can create a pathway to help more people come to worship. The one that I think I would be most interested in with this group, so 70 people in worship, 115 active adults in the Deep South, 20,000 residents. So Susie and I just had
there'd be 200 active adults.
Yes.
That math's a lot cleaner than it took me. What? Yeah. It took me to do that.
I was wondering what you were doing over there.
Yeah.
So Susie and I, we just went on a baby moon and we went to Laurel, Mississippi, and they have 18,000 residents. So I have that town in my head.
Yeah. I know Laurel. That's a good town for us to think about.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the pathway that I think I would want to do is, can we create a pathway that helps people become evangelists in the community, not for the sake of bringing in more people, for the sake of recognition. So let me give you an example. In Mid-City, there's a restaurant, a breakfast place, great place. You and I went there one time, and the owner, it was actually during COVID, he and his wife ended up getting a divorce. Never been to church, never been to Mid-City church. When that stuff started happening, both of them reached out to me. And they said, like, I know you're not my pastor, but you're a pastor. I need somebody to talk to, right? So to increase that kind of engagement from the church to the community, that people might not come to church, but somebody that feels comfortable enough going in the community and openly saying, like, I'm part of First Methodist and I just want to care for you and I want to keep showing up and that kind of stuff. So that's the one that I would be interested in. How do you feel about that?
I love it because that is so not practical whatsoever at all, that it's just so kingdom minded. It's different from saying we're going to increase engagement. I mean, like that. I love it. And I love it. So this kind of stated outcome is a person, they're a person of peace in their community, is a representative of their church.
Yes. I'm writing that down.
Oh, okay. Well.
Yes. So if that's our ending point, let's figure out our starting point. I don't know about you. I would start with those active adults. These are people who seem to already understand who we are as a church, who are invested in the church. My guess is that if they're active, they're giving to the church. They're showing up after hours, maybe on their weekends. So the starting point for me would be anybody who actively participates in the mission of the church.
Yeah. So you got, Fernie was my conversation partner as I've worked out so many of the systems that people have heard about on the podcast. So he knows my language. So those are all objective data points. Yeah. Those people who are giving, who are serving, and are already in some sort of a discipleship loop in the church. That's who comprises those groups of people.
Yeah.
So they're already engaged at some probably truly midpoint level in the church. So you've got that. You also, if we're thinking deep South, Laurel, Mississippi, my family's from Hattiesburg, just down the road. So I know that kind of unity. These are good folks. They're church folks.
Yeah. Yeah.
These are in a lot of ways, they are unknown insiders. They're probably assuming, and I encountered this when we were planning Foundry. They are probably assuming every single person they know goes to a church already. So that's one of their assumptive points.
Yeah. But right. So if our pathway is not, if the end goal of our pathway is not to bring more people to church, it's to be the church, then who cares whether they go to church or not?
Well, I think the only thing about that is I feel like in some places in the deep South, because people always assume everyone else goes to church, evangelistic isn't the right word for it, but I think the winsomeness and the intentionality falls to the wayside. Good church folks, but are probably just assuming everybody's just like them. That might be a better way to put it.
Yeah.
They're just assuming everyone else is just like them.
I like that. Sorry, I can't do pathways without writing stuff down.
Oh, no, you're right. Draw away. Okay, so is that a clear enough of a current picture you feel like to start?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
Start working your magic then.
Okay, so we have the end, we have the beginning. Now let's start working towards the end again. So one of my first thoughts is if you're actively involved in the church, you're probably showing up more than just Sunday morning. So my first step would be, can we encourage this person or persons to do something offsite? So maybe it's just like, I don't know if it's a group of guys breakfast, or if it's young adult breakfast at the same restaurant every single week, regardless of who shows up, who doesn't show up, you're going to show up and have that.
Just embodied presence.
Yes. Yeah. So that would be step one. Step two for me would be to get to know the staff, just staff. A lot of times I think what I've seen happen is when we're trying to like get to know people in the community, we go straight to the owners or straight to and then we forget about everybody who actually does the work day in and day out. Yeah. Not that owners don't do work, but you know what I mean?
Oh, no. You're what you're doing right now is something I've done plenty of times in my life. And I think you're right. I think the staff, because in a lot of ways, the owner might be a little suspicious.
Yeah. Yeah.
It might gatekeep a little bit.
Yep.
But if all the staff love you, then the owner's like, wow, okay, this person's keeping my staff happy.
Yeah.
That's usually their biggest headache.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and if they see you showing up every single week, right, and you're checking on them, you start calling them by name, you start like all of a sudden you're not just a customer, you're a friend.
Yeah.
And just like any friendship, it begins by having conversations and getting to know people and spending more time together, right? So that'd be my first step. Then I would also get people, my third step. So 1, get people to meet in the community. 2, get to know the staff of wherever you're at. 3, okay, so let me tell you a story to answer that. When I was in Chicago for seminary, I would go to the same Starbucks every Thursday night from 6 to 9 p.m. At 9 p.m., I'd go back to the apartments, and a couple of friends and I would get together to watch Scandal, drink a glass of wine and watch Scandal. Love that show. But anyway, so I'd show up every Thursday. Eventually, one day, 2 things happened to me. One day I showed up, and before I even got to the counter, the guy already had my order ready because I always got the same thing, the Valencia orange. They don't make those anymore. But then I noticed that I was sitting down, and one day I was like, oh, that guy is always on that same stool with his computer. This other gentleman is always on that chair with a newspaper. These 2 ladies are always sharing coffee. Like, those are the regulars. And I realized, if I know that, I'm a regular. Right? That's how often I would go.
Yeah.
But when we start showing up, right, in these places, we get to know the staff. They then begin to introduce us to the people they know.
Yes.
Right? So conversation begins to happen. This other person's in line. Oh, hey, did you know Misty or do you know Bob over here? Like, right, those connections begin to happen. And so the intentionality, right, we care for these people. They care about us enough that they want to introduce us to the other people that they care about.
Yeah.
These relationships begin to build.
Yeah.
And they're very organic.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. My friend Taylor and I would get coffee every Monday at same coffee shop. One of the days the barista asked me, do you do weddings? And I was like, yes, I do. And she started telling me about a friend who needed an officiant and how like they were getting stuck because they didn't have their pastor was gonna be able to do it. Stuff like that happened. Like,
oh, it's a real thing. No, real thing.
Yeah. So that'd be my step. Get to know the people that they know. And then I think my 4th step would be to follow up with everyone. So you're showing up, you know them, you know the people they know. Take it that extra step and get to, when you get to know them, hey, how's your mom? How's your cousin doing? Hey, I remember you said this about work. How's that going?
Yep.
I think if we do those 4 steps, the end result of that is all of a sudden we're in the community and we're being Jesus to people, right? I think that's the ultimate goal for me.
It's incarnated presence.
Yeah. Yes.
Huge.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so if something comes up at that point and they need a church, you're going to be the person they reach out to.
Yeah. And like, what's so funny is at that point in time, I'm going to insert a pathway I'm working on right now that, the workshop tonight, creating an invitational culture. Part of that is, literally this level of winsomeness that you just pathed out for us. But then there's a super tangible, easy part of it that I've done for years. It's not new whatsoever at all. Others have done it. It's just, really simple invite cards to church. They say, hey, why don't you come this Sunday?
Yeah.
And knowing you've got 5 or 6 of those in your bag. And you can just kind of that tangible piece of giving that, which sounds super creepy if they're strangers.
Right.
Like one time I was in a coffee shop in Monroe, and I was meeting with Allison Sauls, who's our associate pastor at the time, and one of our musicians who we were bringing into leadership in another way. And we're having we're having church staff meeting for the most part. Like Bibles are out, all this kind of stuff is going on. And this woman comes up to us, and her church was doing like a Reap the Harvest program or whatever, and she invited us to church and had a little card. And there's a piece of me was like, lady, clearly I mean, if you missed all the Bibles on the table,
Yeah.
but then also realized she was terrified to do it because it feels so absolutely threatening to walk up to a complete stranger and invite them to church. And we felt safe. The other side of that coin then is let's live in an incarnate way to where when you have a deep relationship with somebody already, you've already had the conversation. Hey, my mom said, da. The point in time comes to where any weirdness or ickiness about inviting them to church is no longer present whatsoever because of the relationship.
Yeah. No. So I remember early on when I was starting to do church plant, I have a friend in Kansas City who was also a church planter. And we remember going to all these different conferences and every pastor talking about like, I spent time at a coffee shop and I spent time at a coffee shop. And that's where we met a whole bunch of people. And I remember my friend Kyle and I asking each other one day, like, so what do you do at the coffee shop? Right? Like I wanted these like 10 steps for what you do at the coffee shop to get people to come to your church. And what I learned was you just show up.
Yeah.
Show up and get to know them, show up in a non-creepy way, like you said earlier. But like, just if I show up and the same person's taking my order every week, eventually I'm gonna be like, hey, what's your name, by the way?
Yeah.
Right? I give them my name every week. Eventually I'm going to want to ask their name and I can follow up on them and I get to meet people in the community. And I mean, that's building those relationships, those friendships, those connections. All of a sudden I can say, hey, Chad, you want to come to church with me?
Yeah.
And not just, hey, I have this card and then walk away.
It's weird. Well, when we started Foundry, we had a 14-month, because we were doing the whole launch cards, the whole parachute drop business. So we had a 14-month runway, and I started that church out of the morning at the same coffee and breakfast place, and every afternoon at the cigar store. I mean, that was literally it. And when I tell you 60 to 70% of that people that first 6 months at our church, I had some level of interaction with them at one of those two places. And so I know we've taken this curve about how pastors do this, but I'm also thinking back to Steve James, who was my coach for years and now my boss with Passion and Partnership, told me for years as he was coaching me, Chad, you have, because I mean, what you just designed out is my MO. That's my evangelistic MO. But Steve always said, Chad, you have to find a way to teach other people to do this. Yeah. You have to, if this is relying on you, and we had one other person at the church who kind of operated like I did. He said, you've got to have 20 of those. You get to have everybody knowing how you, and I always said, Steve, you can't teach people how to do this. Well, you just designed a pathway for it in 10 minutes.
That's what I love to do.
Yeah. So it's not, and so what I also love about that, well, let me keep are you at the point to where?
Yeah, no, I think that follow-up piece, that following up for me means caring about each other, actually taking the stories that people share and saying like, hey, I listened, I heard you. And that's what become the presence of Jesus in the communities.
Yeah. And so you could have multiple jump off points from that.
Yeah.
You know, if you did begin to see people start coming to church, you would need some assimilation stuff.
Right.
You would need all these things. But if that larger goal was to create people being an embodied presence of Jesus in the community, you know, you've got probably a pretty good 4 or 5 points of a sermon right there, but you also have super tangible expressions of what this looks like. That's right there.
Yeah, I mean, because it's for a lay person, it's hard for any of us. But to be able to say, like, I want you to go out into the community and be the presence of Jesus to people, like that sounds intimidating, right?
Extremely.
So if I say to people, hey, you guys are always, you always come to church together. Why don't you go get coffee? Or let's go get coffee for a couple weeks, every week. And then slowly I'm like, all right, I'm going to leave you all do this. I'm going to step away. They keep doing this. They start getting to know people. Like, this is such an easy way to get people to do, to live out their faith without ever making them feel intimidated or like it's too much of them or
I go and get breakfast once a week with a group of guys. Well, their group is there every week. My presence being there every week is not as predictable. 6 o'clock in the morning on a Friday is not my favorite time to be somewhere. But there's this breakfast joint in Alexandria, and I know at least 3 mornings a week there will be multiple groups of people meeting for breakfast and discipleship from the same church there, to the point where we're almost filling up the restaurant. And I've been asking myself the question, does the presence of all these people here actually make any sort of a difference or an impact? Mm-hmm. And I've had multiple experiences being in public places, because if you're of a certain age, you live your life in public. And I've been in places before thinking through this, like, does this make any sort of a difference? Well, as part of a strategy for reaching your community, this spells out a way to say, hey, go meet outside of the church. Mm-hmm. And when you meet outside of the church, also realize there are a couple of other things that are going on. It's like, this is not the pathway I thought we would have come to in this conversation. Mm-hmm. But it's a great example of what this looks like. Mm-hmm. So,
well, and I'll even say, because we talked about getting people to come back to the church, right? I think that's a great example of why knowing your outcome is so important, right? Because as we were taking these steps, we could have ended up in 10 different places.
Yeah.
But we had clear from the very beginning, this is where we want to end. And we made sure our path led us to that. And yes, we could have veered off at any point and said, okay, and we're going to focus on getting people to come back to the church now. What's the steps for that? Yeah. Or we're going to focus on starting a ministry at the coffee shop. How do we do? Yeah. What are the steps for that? Right? Like the end point is so important, because as we take our steps, I feel like every step gets us to a fork in the road, right? Yeah. We can go whatever direction we want, but if we know where we want to go, then we'll take the right step.
And it helps you when you get to a question you could not anticipate. It helps you anticipate. Or maybe to a situation where the old question no longer applies and you need a new question.
Yep.
That end goal really helps you just keep focused there. Mm-hmm. So, man, great example of this thing. So, Fernie, I'm going to ask you one question before we pop off today. Okay. I'm also going to remind people, and this is on the front end of stuff, but go to the link in the show notes, get on Fernie's mailing list, because he's thinking about this stuff a lot and is working some stuff for the future. And there's no better person for you to learn this from than Fernie. But Fernie, if a church has no pathways at all, what do you think are the 3 critical first pathways to think through?
We're developing another pathway.
No, have to develop them. You say, if you have no pathways at your church,
yeah,
these are the 3 ones, maybe not most critical, but the best ways to start thinking like this.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer it as a pastor first. If I'm the pastor and our church has no pathways, I need to have clarity of mission, vision, and values, because otherwise every pathway is going to lead me to different places, and we don't want that. Yeah. So I need to have clarity of that. I think we also need to identify people who have clarity about that, and they can help us lead these pathways. So they don't need to be perfect. They just need to have some clarity around it. And then I would say as a pastor as well, I carry this notebook around everywhere. Have something that, like, if you have an idea of what you want, an end idea, just like write it down. And anything can be a pathway. So that is, I think that's the third thing I would say. If you're the pastor, anything you want to do, you can make a pathway for it. It can create intentionality. It doesn't mean that's the only way to do it. It's just the way you're going to do it. So that's what I would say. If you're a lay person, I would say, push your church, push your pastor even to help create that type of clarity. You yourself have that type of clarity. And I think that'll help. You can push your pastor, you can push the staff at your church. If there's a staff, you can push other leaders and volunteers, to have a clear understanding of what our ultimate end goal is. So for us, it's somebody who helps to bring about heaven on earth for all people. And you can begin, like, our ultimate end goal can help us create pathways to get to the ultimate end goal as well. So I think those are the things I would say.
Yeah. I love how you're significantly less action focused as I am, and do a better job thinking about what the actual first steps would be. So love it. Fernie, it's been great having you on these last couple episodes of Productive Pastor. Make sure y'all go check him out. Trust me, go check him out. He's one of the smartest folks I know, and he's doing fantastic work.
Thanks, Chad. You're too kind.
Ladies and gentlemen, my buddy Fernie. Fernie is a treasure. I've loved doing ministry with him for these last several years, having conversations about church planting. What does it mean to develop a congregation, to develop people, innovative strategies, all those sorts of things. I've been wanting to have these two conversations with him for a good long time, but you've just heard from Fernie what I think is just a masterclass in understanding pathways, not just as pragmatic things, but as vision development. Also, what does it mean to care enough about people to want to see them grow? So it was a treasure to have him on the show. Make sure you go over to the podcast, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/058. The show notes, grab Fernie's free ebook. I was the first person to download it, and it wasn't because I was helping him check links. That's what it was. But I really wanted to have this for my own work and for my own churches and what I'm doing right now. So I encourage you to go over there and grab that. Next episode, we're going to have a conversation about assimilation. This is something that comes up a lot. One of the most popular episodes of the Old School Productive Pastor, that first iteration, was an episode about using Trello for assimilation. And I've got a Trello course coming out this month. And I feel like it's time for us to just have another conversation about assimilation. Most of y'all know that I've been doing a lot of work in congregational development, some research with church growth, these sorts of things. What does the normal size church look like post-COVID? How do they reach people? How do they grow? All this sort of things. And I feel like assimilation is a great topic for us to talk about. So keep your eyes peeled for that next episode when that comes out. Hope you have a great one. You know, if you're in Methodist land, it's annual conference season, so we're all doing all sorts of things in those ways. But I will check you back on the next one. Thanks for tuning in this time.